Dear Earthmates, we are visiting Julia Chaitin in Israel. Um, Julia Chaitin is a social psychologist and a peace builder. Two very important and uh, um, what's the word? Interbreeding, maybe fields. Thank you so much, Julia Chaitin, for accepting this invitation. Um, um, how would you What made you go into the field of social psychology?
I live on a kibbutz um, in the southern part of Israel, near the border with Gaza. Um, and I came to the kibbutz at a young age. I was born and raised in the U.S. Um, and I moved to Israel in 1972 when I was 19. And I came for ideological reasons. I believed it was the homeland of the Jews, and Jews should live here. And also, I had belonged to a movement, a youth movement called Habonim, which means the builders in Hebrew. And it was a labor Zionist Jewish youth movement. And the idea was that you would make Aliyah, you would immigrate to Israel, and you would live a socialist kind of life on kibbutz. So from the age of 16, 17, that is what I wanted to do. So I got married. I was 20, lived on the kibbutz, and doing, I was working with children and things like that because that's what the kibbutz said they needed basically women to do. So I did it. Um, but over the years, I was not fulfilled with this work, and I'm a person with a lot of energy and motivation, and I decided that I couldn't keep doing something that I didn't want to get up in the morning and go to it. It was just depressing me too much. And then I started thinking, what can I do that would be useful to the kibbutz, and it would be something that I wanted to do. And so I thought of doing something that combined the personal with the social, doing something that would be good for the community. Since a kibbutz is a small community and it's based on mutual responsibility, mutual help, mutual support, I had no idea what that meant. But I just thought maybe if I go and I learn something like that at the university, then I could do something with it. I was very wrong, but that's how I got into the topic. Um, and so my bachelor's was in it was called behavioral sciences, psychology, sociology, anthropology. And then I did my master's, and I wanted to do social psychology, but they just closed the program. So I did organizational psychology because it was the closest to what I wanted. And then when I finished my master's, so my advisor, mentor, the late Professor Dan Baron, said I should go on for my doctorate and then I could do a social psychology. So I did my doctorate in social psychology, and the topic was the long term impact, significance, meaning of the Shoah, the Holocaust, on families of survivors. So the victims themselves, their children, their grandchildren, um, but through a psychosocial lens, not through a clinical psychological. So, what is the meaning? What are the values? What's passed down from generation to generation? Um, Things like that. And so I heavily learned social psychology and became an academic over the years. Um, And that also led me um, to peace work, to also research on peace, on peace building. First, maybe we call it conflict resolution. I don't deal with that anymore. I talk about peace building, um, and mostly, and then for a number of years also, focusing mainly on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Jewish and Arab within Israel. Um, and I moved from, so I don't talk about conflict resolution. I talk about peace building as a way of life, as not as an end goal and not as something that you do, but who you are and how you live your life. Trying. Not always succeeding, but the idea is that this is the path of life, and that so it's all based, it's firmly rooted in social psychology. The fact that the level, that the personal level, the interpersonal level, the intergroup level, the community level, they're all connected. Then the social level, the social political level, they're all connected. And what happens is that people, maybe what you had said before when we were talking before, is that nothing can happen without dialogue, true dialogue between people. True dialogue I'll say, I use it like in a Buberian sense of building community, of relating to one another, the I, thou, the I, you, to build something together, to co-create community. Um, so that's the basis. So I don't say that that solves everything, but I say that nothing can change without ongoing true dialogue. That's such a cornerstone. So sometimes people tell me that dialogue is passé and we tried it and it doesn't work. And my answer to that is it could never be passé because that's how we connect with one another. And if it hasn't worked, then maybe we should think about maybe how we can do it better and what we could do to improve it and what maybe what are we not getting at? So what are we not getting at? Maybe there are better ways to do it. Because my experience in research and in activism on the ground has shown me that when people are in true dialogue with one another, it does not take very long for good changes to occur. And because people then they actually see one another, and sometimes for the first time, but they actually see them. Um, so you can be in deep dialogue with someone and not agree with them at all, but you can have a very healthy relationship with them because you know how to speak to one another and you know how to listen to one another. And that means that when a bad conflict arises, and in our world, in our social political world, they often do, and especially here in Israel Palestine, that's our life. Then it's not, there are things we're never going to agree on, but if we're going to agree that it's always going to be a dialogue, and it's heavily based on my deep belief on nonviolence as an ideology. That violence can never be on the table, can never be an option. It can never be, okay, if we don't manage, then we'll resort to violence. Because once you resort to, if you're resorting to violence, you are not living a life of peace building. You're giving up. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think that at least if we try that a lot more, we'd be in a much better place. So
A
that's kind of a long answer to social psychology.
wonderful answer, comprehensive, deep. Thank you. And I agree with you. It's an ethical choice. I think. Ethical choices should not depend on circumstances. Uh, it's an ethical choice. Um, um, uh, and I find inner peace and interpersonal peace as important as international peace. Many peace builders, many people who want peace, focus on international peace, but those people may be fighting against each other. They are peace seekers, but how about interpersonal relationship? So it's a as you said, they are all related, and um, uh, we cannot not mention the tragedy in Gaza, of course. Uh, what what is your feeling, your thought? What would you like to say?
Um, this last round began on October 7th, 2023, and I live near the Gaza border, so I went through it. So I know what happened. Um, and I can say that I never thought that I would have such an experience in my life. When as I said, I was born, I grew up in the US. Okay, I was a child during the 60s. It wasn't that things weren't happening, but they weren't happening to me personally. And for instance, the Vietnam War was happening very far away. And all the struggle for civil rights were happening to Black people, but I was white. Um, there was anti-Semitism. I felt that being Jewish, but it wasn't my personal life was shielded. I would say, in general. And I'll also say I was a child, so I didn't really understand on a greater level what all this meant. Um, but from the age of 16, I was very active in demonstrations and rights for people. Those were things I did. Okay, anyway, so when I thought about, um, and I've lived in Israel since 19, first came in 1970, I've lived in Israel since 72. So, of course, I know about terror attacks, I know about war, I've lived through many of them, but I never thought that what we went through here I never I never imagined such a thing, and I never thought that I personally would find myself locked in a safe room with my daughter and granddaughter and husband and really scared to death whether terrorists were going to invade the kibbutz, which they went right by. There was firing, there was shooting. Um, Two of our members were wounded. We had no security force. I mean, it could have happened. And it was kind of like a miracle that it didn't. No one can explain why they didn't come in here, but went on to somewhere else, for example. Um, and the depth of the hatred. Um, right now, I'll say the Hamas and their collaborators. Of course, I understood that they not only hate Israelis, hate Jews. That's been in their charter, and these are things I'm well aware of. But what was done, the level that I didn't realize, and also the fact that so many Gazans supported that and were happy for what had happened on that day. And it took me a few weeks to get over the shock and of what had happened and start, because also I know many people who were murdered, kidnapped, wounded, friends and friends closer and farther from me. Um, so, and my children, of course. they're grown up, but many of their friends and teachers um, were wounded, killed, abducted. So it's something that sat very heavy on me. And with that said, and at the beginning I said, okay, we have to go to war because of what happened. How are we not going to respond to that? That was my gut reaction. And then and then people were saying, then I started thinking, okay, um, because that's kind of a gut reaction, and I think we had to do something. I don't know what would have been better. What I do know is that over time, and for a long time now, that what's been happening is, in my opinion, completely it's revenge. I don't see anything else. The um, and I don't understand why it's still happening. My main concern as an for Israeli are the hostages should come home. 100 hostages, many of them are no longer alive. Um, and that to me that consumes me a lot, thinking that innocent people who were taken from their beds need to come home. And the huge numbers of innocent Gazans who are being harmed because they're Gazans for no other reason, because they're there. And the the physical destruction, the psychological destruction, the infrastructure, it's the whole thing is like to me, I don't get it. I don't see how this is helping. I don't see how this is going to make us better or safer. I don't see how harming innocent people who who they, they let me put it this way. Somebody who carried out one of the terror attacks. So I don't have empathy for someone who raped. I don't have empathy for someone who murdered. I don't have empathy for someone who kidnapped an innocent person from their home. I don't have sympathy or empathy for someone who is holding a hostage. I can understand why the ordinary Gazan under um, the horrific uh, regime of the Hamas is doing that because they're a horrific regime who cares nothing about their own people, and that's been clear also forever. Um, but I we just can't. I mean, to me, this is just I don't know. It's crazy. It makes no sense to me. Um, Gazans are being wounded and killed. Israeli soldiers are being wounded and killed. There are still rockets. There are drones. It's like I don't understand how this is moving us forward to anything good. To me, it's just entrenching the hate on both sides. So right now, for a long time, it's clear to me in my head, the war has to end. The hostages have to be returned. It has to be a complete deal. We have to with just what they say here is everybody for everybody. Just return whatever people the Hamas wants the prisoners out of the jails. We get the hostages back and we end this. And then I don't know what's going to happen, but it's clear to me also that we can't live with a Hamas regime next door. That's an impossibility. It makes no sense to me whatsoever that people on this side of the border have to live with uh, rocket attacks. And I don't care if it's one every 2 weeks. I don't get it. Why should ordinary people have to live with the knowledge that every now and then their community is going to be there's going to be a rocket? Makes no sense to me. And why should the Gazans have to live in the fear that every now and then there'll be an Air Force, an Israeli Air Force attack or a tank attack? That makes no sense to me. People should be able to live decent lives wherever you are, whoever you are. The rights that I should have, the rights that I have and should have, are the rights that everybody should have. That's how I look at it. The fact that I was born in the US is it's just a matter of luck. I mean, I didn't choose to be where I was going to be born. I didn't choose that my skin was going to be white. I didn't choose that I was born to a family that had university degrees and professional jobs. It was just my luck. Like nobody chose that they were born to a refugee family in a tent with nothing to eat. So my belief is that every person on this planet is deserving of the exact same human rights. No one deserves more, no one deserves less, and that is what we need to get to. That has to be, in my opinion, a given. Many people call me extreme left wing for saying that. I don't understand how that's extreme at all. I'm just saying everybody has the same rights. So that's how I look at it. But right now, I see that we're in this terrible, terrible mess, mainly because our prime minister wants to keep his coalition together and stay in power, and he's at trial now also, and that's why this policy, in my opinion, is just causing more deaths, and it's more Palestinian deaths, and it's more Israeli deaths, and it's enough. It's too much, and it's definitely enough. So right now, that's how I see it. And I also think maybe the last sentence is that it's not an Israeli-Palestinian problem. It's a world problem. It is a problem for all of us. And um, it can't just be that, okay, okay, like if you also take Ukraine and Russia, it's not a Ukrainian Russian issue, it's a world issue. So, yes, of course, things are happening there specifically, but these things impact all of us. And we all know how much the Israeli Palestinian conflict impacts the world on every single level. So there has to be world interest in solving it, but really solving it. And that is not by saying the Palestinians have no rights or the Israelis have no rights. It's not by saying we need to you know, we need to punish this one or punish that one. I think what we need to do is find a way that both peoples can live the life that they deserve to live, that we deserve to live. So I don't have an answer, but I have this to me is what we need to do, and nobody seems to be working in that way. It's more just now maybe how to end the war, but not about okay, then what? Good, let's end the war. Good start, but then now what? How do
Yes.
we make people's lives good?
Um, I think secularity um, is important. Um, People who are caught up in dogmas, um, uh, they say we are right and the others are completely, we'll go to heaven, they'll go to hell, and to hell with them. And uh, unfortunately, the strict interpretations of religions um, have been harming humanity. Um, there is always a humanistic approach in each religious aspect movement. So human rights, uh, that's really one of the positively radical thing in human history, and it's not something um, cheap or unimportant. Um, and I agree with you. We just have to do our best for a broader understanding. And unfortunately, Um, there are big powers, and there are that's a part of life, fact of life. And about one and a half, um, more than 1.5 years ago, I learned that I learned this last year, but about 1.5 years ago, Netanyahu promised to the British Petroleum the natural resources of Gaza. Um, so before the Hamas attack, the Israeli government, Netanyahu government, had already promised to market the riches of Gaza people to the UK. So, and there is something fishy there. But so we need to uh, learn from one another and be open to good information, knowledge. And um, I have written a monodrama based on the diary of Anna Frank. And one of my dreams um, has been an Arab girl in Gaza performing that monodrama, Anna Frank, an Arab girl performing. Um, and when I visited Israel, I talked to people like you and my other Jewish friends. But when we talk, we are talking to one another. We are on the same side. And I asked them, you know, you- I visited the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem twice with my wife the second time. And after all those tragedies, um, uh, the children, grandchildren of the oppressed, let's say, murdered, should be more understanding and more careful when they treat
Yes,
others.
but uh, okay, I wrote an article with a colleague about that in 2008, and it was called we called it "You Should Know Better," and it's that topic. If you're an oppressed people and then you oppress others, well, you should know better because you were oppressed. But the article actually looks at again at the social psychological basis of that, and what happens is when people are oppressed on the whole, that does not make them more empathetic or sympathetic towards others. It has the opposite effect. So the fact that you should know better, okay, maybe you should know better, but you can't know better because you're still traumatized. And this trauma is intergenerational and it's passed on from generation to generation and never gets solved. It never gets really what we call worked through, doesn't really get processed. So even though we think that if you were an oppressed people, well, then this should have taught you don't oppress others. Okay. So there are some cases like that, but overall, that's not the way that people react. And one other way that I called it was I said, for example, this trauma which can get translated, of course, into violence toward another. It has no shelf life. It has no shelf life. It keeps going on. So we really do we need to process and work with that and not say, okay, the Shoah ended 80 years ago. All right, get over it. Or the Nakba ended 75 years ago. Get over it. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. So there's no way to, and this is something that I work with a lot in the last few years, there's no way to do peace building without going through that pain, without understanding the pain and the trauma deeply, because it's such an important part of people's identity. And you can't jump over that to say, okay, let's make some kind of agreement. You need to go deeply into it. So not to get stuck not to get stuck in it, but to understand it and to use that as a platform for understanding and changing things. Um, so, um, and I think people around the world, we're all guilty of that, that we should know better, but we don't, because what does that teach people? That teaches people that the world is cruel, that people will discriminate you and persecute you, and so therefore you're going to do it and not be a victim again, instead of thinking, okay, what does this mean and what can we do? Um, so that we should know better, yes, but that's not the way that people work.
You're right, um, and again, I agree with you that despite all, we should keep doing our best. And social psychology is a vital area. And thank you for focusing on it and for peace building. I agree with you that instead of conflict resolution, because that's a negative, there is something negative there. Peace building is an affirmative, positive naming, and that is important. What would you like to recommend to younger Earthmates all over the world?
I would recommend to them, like I recommend to everybody, we need to have more complex thinking. We need to not look for reason, the one factor. We need um, to be deep, and to consider different possibilities. And again, and to listen. You don't have to agree. You do not need to agree, but to listen especially deeply to people with whom you disagree and try to understand who they are and what their experiences have been and what has their life been, and learn from that, and then try to understand more deeply, what does that mean? So I think I know that's something that we need to start from age 0 with children, but we need to continue it to people who, we would say till 120, till your last day on earth, is that this is learning to have more complex, deep thinking and consider things and not rush for the solution, is much, in my opinion, and from what my experience has taught me, is a much better way to actually understand things and to know what directions we need to take uh, to make the world. And I don't say better; I say to make the world good. I don't Better isn't good enough. I want the world to be good.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Julia.
you.
It's been delightful to meet you. Thank you. We're
Thank you.
together. Best wishes.
Okay.
Solidarity. Thank you.
Bye.